This is a thing that I always arrive to with these types of conversations, bag talk or who's better in isolation. Who really cares? We're trying to win NBA basketball games. Score in whatever way scores the ball. Hello everybody, welcome to Awesome Rusty Buckets. If you're ever on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and drop a like to help the video do better in the algorithm. It is much appreciated. Also check us out over on Apple Podcasts and Spotify if you want to enjoy this as an audio-only experience. This is Hot Takes Tuesdays, and it's actually on a Tuesday. We're not going to be doing Hot Takes Tuesdays on Friday anymore. If you want to make sure you get your take read, make sure it's a spicy one because there's going to be less opportunity for you to do that. With that said, though, let's get into these takes. All right, so first things first, we have a take in response to the title take, which happens often. I don't always like to acknowledge them, but in this case, this take from Soken MOC, people saying efficiency is overrated are just defending their players who are inefficient with high volume that are hard to build around. I definitely think there is credence to the argument that, you know, a person who is making this anti-efficiency argument is just inherently like some fan of some player who isn't very efficient and regularly gets that criticism. I like to generally take it on good faith that these people are actually somewhat believing the shit that they say. Like, you could argue, you know, an Allen Iverson fan doesn't think efficiency matters because they're an Allen Iverson fan, but maybe they're an Allen Iverson fan because they don't think efficiency matters that much. It can be a two-way streak. I like to take people's opinion at more face value and trust that they're actually being authentic with it, but to say that a lot of people are disingenuous with the arguments and are just looking for whatever is on the side of a player that they care about, well, unfortunately, that is very true. From VMan8757, James Harden's playoff failures are overblown. I don't think he's an all-time playoff performer or anything, but he's consistently put up good numbers while in Houston and just got unlucky that his team's championship window coincided with the KD Warriors. I mostly agree with you. I do think that a lot of the criticism for James Harden's career is overblown. However, to say he outright isn't a choker, I wouldn't go that far. There are definitely big games throughout his career where he has choked, and that matters. The choker label is not always necessarily about what your production is holistically, because it is inarguable that when you look at his Houston tenure, James Harden's playoff production is fucking ridiculous. 28 points per game, 7 assists per game. His efficiency could definitely be better. He's at 42% from the field and 32.5% from three, so there is an efficiency dip. But I think it's worth mentioning that a dip in your stats isn't necessarily some big dropping off point. That kind of happens in general, and if you take a look at James Harden's three-point and field goal efficiencies in Houston, this isn't actually that dramatically different from what you would expect from him in the regular season. 42% instead of 44% from the field, 32% instead of 36% from three. Like, we're not talking about some major drop-off. The issue more comes in specifically closeout games where James Harden has routinely disappointed. I don't love this label because it gives an impression that, as a whole, James Harden was like a bad playoff performer or something like that. That's objectively untrue. He is, I mean, you said it over here. I don't think he's an all-time playoff performer. I mean, where are we drawing the line at all time? Because if over a 7-year stretch, 85-game stretch, you're averaging 28, 7, and 2 steals, and as much as we harp on the field goal percentage and three-point percentage, you take a look at the true shooting percentage. Once again, the guy's efficiency, perfectly fine, probably above the league average over that stretch of time. That's about what the league average is right now, and this is from years and years ago at 58%. So I just don't really think that it's as big of an issue with him as a lot of people act like it is. That said, legacies are often built on game 7s or not blowing a series that you should probably win, and he has a couple of those. It's undeniable. That's a factor. I just wish people didn't act like that was the whole picture. But I mostly agree with the sentiment of what you're saying. From No Balls Podcast, max contracts are the reason the CBA is quote-unquote too harsh. When players hit the open market, they are usually given the most money possible. This offseason of rookie extensions would have been a great time to change that trend with the rookie max awarding guys like Scottie, Cade, and Mobley $40 a year. However, the teams didn't think twice to offer these deals. Not to say that those guys aren't worth the deals they got, but teams are not going to have flexibility if they give out max contracts at every chance they get. Nuggets would still have a solid group of role players if they didn't feel entitled to max out Michael Porter Jr. The 76ers would have been much better without maxing Tobias. I largely agree with this point. This is kind of a thing where it's like, well, if everybody's doing it, unfortunately, you can't really be the one to break from the mold. Like, I don't think there's a franchise that's about to win a championship purely out of stubbornness for being willing to give max contracts. That said, I do agree with the overall sentiment that there has been a little bit too much just, okay, well, this player is top 50. I guess we have to give him a max. I just don't see how that makes sense. Now, there is a difference between a max contract for like an all-NBA guy because that elevates the amount of money the max actually is. But with just about every NBA team, at least close to it, having 2 max slots that are going towards players, like teams are, almost every team in the league has 2 guys on near max contracts at the bare minimum, max at the very least when they sign those contracts. So yeah, I agree. However, I don't know, the CBA was made understanding that that's how that market works. The CBA was made knowing that this was already the tendency of NBA franchises, so I don't really think you can act like one is there without the other. They're definitely connected, and it's definitely a massive factor, but the CBA was invented with the modern rules and the modern context of basketball GMing in mind. It's not like this is something that has existed forever and gotten worse over time because the trend of giving players max contracts more often. You know, I think one begets the other, and we can't act like they're fully separate things. All right, this is a long one, but it looks interesting. The reason the NBA has so many casuals isn't because it's the simplest of the North American major sports. While throw ball and hoop is simple, kick ball into net, use stick to puck into net, and hit the ball with stick and run around bases are also simple. The NFL is the only one that takes more than a minute or so to explain the absolute basics. I'm not saying these sports aren't complex when analyzed. I'm just saying that being able to enjoy them in layman's terms with surface level knowledge is easy. The reason the NBA has more casual fans is because it's the one where you can tune out for 5 to 10 minutes mid-game and be confident you won't miss a key moment. Goals, home runs, and touchdowns are all game-changing events. No single basket mid-game will make the game do a 180, meaning basketball is a super easy thing to have on the background as you cook, do housework, engage in other hobbies, and etc. While being confident you won't miss the defining moments of the game. This makes it very appealing to someone who's content with just enjoying the game and not analyzing it. I agree with this. In general, the stakes are consistently the same. Like, the experience of the sport is generally consistently the same throughout the majority of the game until you get into the later stretch where the intensity goes up a little bit. But like, just the simplicity of, yeah, if you watch a second half of a game instead of a full game, you're probably going to get most of the full context. And there is so much scoring as well. Like, if you watch a compilation of all of the scores in a soccer game or a baseball game or a football game, that's a 5 to 15 minute long YouTube video. If you want to watch every single bucket from a game, you're probably not going to find that video because most of the videos are going to cut out a lot of baskets that end up not being that visually interesting. Every basket's consequential, but they're not necessarily consequential in the scheme of the entertainment value or the momentum of the game. Yeah, I just mostly agree with you on this. It was a long take, so I wanted to give you a long-winded answer, but you're correct. It's just very easy to consume, not just because it's easy to understand, but literally tangibly, the moment-to-moment product is rather easy to digest, and you don't have to dedicate a bunch of time and attention to understand it. From Curb Stomp, the GOAT defender conversation is too focused on two-way guys. Duncan and Hakeem are better players than Dikembe Mutombo, but not inherently better defenders. I do think that they are the top two, but guys like Ben Wallace, Mutombo, and Gobert are often overlooked because they weren't superstars. I understand the point you're making. What's interesting, something that I have factored in to the DPOY race for quite a while now is like, what level of popularity does this player have? What level of attention do they get? And a lot of that will come from if they have an offensive game as well. Like a Ben Wallace type of player is not really someone who's going to be super like popular, especially in a modern NBA context, like a Dikembe Mutombo, and especially look at what people think of Rudy Gobert, dude. Okay, if you are a one-sided defensive player and you don't, well, obviously defense is one-sided. I mean, if you're a one-sided player and your energy is on the defensive end, you would think like that gives you more credence to focus your energy on the defensive end of the floor. But also, I do think that Hakeem and Tim Duncan are the two greatest defenders ever. I also don't agree. So I agree that, yes, it is a reputation boost that they're a two-way guy, but I also think that Hakeem Olajuwon is just the greatest defender ever. And if you put that defensive capability in any player, I would hope that I could recognize that. But obviously, part of this is conjecture. Part of this is legacies being carried on. And the true answer to most of these questions, like who is the greatest defender of all time in the NBA, there isn't an actual answer to that. Same as there isn't an actual true, undeniable answer to the GOAT conversation or anything like that. But to say that being a two-way player definitely benefits you, I agree wholeheartedly. I remember talking about Bam. I was like, I don't know if Bam will ever get like a DPOY because the Heat are not that popular and they're not a good offense, and he's like an okay, it's like he's a 20-point scorer, but you know, that's not really that difficult these days, not really that uncommon these days. So having more of a superstar and offensive star aura definitely does impact your reputation as a defensive player. At the same time, though, I do feel like the Ben Wallaces, Mutombos, and Goberts, also because their game is so limited to defense, are simultaneously respected and focused on their defense more, to a point, and ironically in the case of Gobert, and I would say this would be true of Ben Wallace in the modern NBA, it didn't impact him as much in his time, but like Rudy Gobert's offensive limitations end up hurting Minnesota a lot, and people rarely actually end up mentioning that because he has the reputation of a defensive player. Essentially, the overarching point here, reputation does a lot, and the actual true answer, you're gonna have to look a little bit past just basic conjecture. From Pricefield Punk, head coaches should have to go back to wearing suits. I agree. I think it looks better. That's my only reasoning. I don't care if they're gonna get sweaty, get over it. You're not actually playing the game. From Nick Nurse Nut, okay, that's a name. New CBA seems too harsh until you see the Celtics and realize it's still possible to get around it. And then this reply immediately is exactly what I would say. The Celtics haven't gotten around anything. The owner is actively trying to sell the team to get out of the drawbacks of the new CBA. So with the Celtics, unlike the last couple of championship teams who have tried to bring back their roster, they have successfully actually brought everyone back. There is just a significant financial burden that comes with that most owners don't want to deal with. The Boston Celtics brought everybody back, but now their owner doesn't want to be a part of this shit. So this is like the one case where they actually went over that line and said, fuck it, we're going to deal with it. But even then, the people who are actually sitting there and have to deal with it are trying to abandon ship. So I think the CBA is still too harsh, and even if the Celtics were able to get away with this scot-free, the fact that they'd be the first team to do it pretty much since the 2020s have started, since this more difficult era to win championships and retain your key talent has come around. If only the Celtics are the ones to do it, well, clearly the shit's still too harsh, because that's just one example, man. From the Finesse Kid, Antawn Jamison is one of the most underrated players ever, top 55 in scoring. Well, I'm willing to bet he's anywhere between 50 and 55 because that's very specific. But he had an amazing 7-year stretch from 03 to 09, averaging 20 and 8 on good efficiency. Probably overlooked because of a lack of awards, but played in a time with stacked forwards, Braun, Pierce, Melo, etc. Not to mention there were other power forwards, and as earlier you're like 03 through 09, you're talking about Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett, Chris Webber. Those are also guys who are getting in the way of like award races for Antawn. To be honest, I don't know if I agree with you. First of all, top 55, that's a real specific metric. Like after top 50, you're getting a bunch of weird names. They're dudes who are not necessarily that underrated. They were just around for a while, and Antawn Jamison's definitely someone who was around for a while. And like his peak years, he's missing all-star teams even when he's putting up numbers that are similar to his peak year numbers. So I would say that even though, yes, the fact that he played at an extremely stacked position worked against his favor, I also don't really think he was like that special of a player. He was a power forward specifically, who had a really good jump shot, and that was in line with like Chris Webber or LaMarcus Aldridge, those dudes of his era. Obviously, Dirk is a more highlighted example of that, another forward from his era that I missed. I don't know, there's probably a good handful of players throughout history you can find who can get roughly the same level of production as a peak Antawn Jamison, and the fact that he is top 55 in scoring all time is more a product of longevity than it is, I don't fucking know, actually being some super underrated all-time talent. I'm gonna have to disagree with you on that. From 10-10-2s, a lot of people act like Curry is the only player with gravity when it comes to comparing him with other players. It's like people just forget that other players, especially those who are dominant in the paint, have an extreme amount of gravity as well. Example, Giannis. So it's weird, but I guess I'm saying that Curry's gravity is overrated even though he's got the most off-ball gravity in history. Well, I think specifically a big part of the reason why Steph's gravity gets highlighted more than any other players is that off-ball aspect of it. It is that even when the guy does not have the ball in his hands, and pretty much no matter where he is on the court, he is sucking in the attention of the defense. Like, Shaq without the ball, you're probably not going to bring two defenders or have a bunch of defenders scrambling and leaving other guys open for layups and shit just based on entirely the fear of him getting the ball, when like it's going to take a couple seconds for him to get a shot up. You have time to bring a second defender. But Steph without the ball, and again, this is anywhere on the court, not just in the restricted area, not just on the baseline, but like legitimately anywhere. As soon as you cross half court, you have to worry about a lightning quick shot going up in a matter of a second. Like other players, there's more of a way to load up on them. With Steph, there is a degree of he can do that shit in a split second that makes it a lot harder to do that, and ultimately makes his gravity more important. That said, I do agree that a lot of people use that term gravity as though Steph is the only player who has it, when anybody who has the level of offensive unstoppability that Stephen Curry does, and there are plenty of other players throughout history who do, that player has gravity. Now, then it becomes a matter of how effectively does that player use that gravity to their advantage? How effectively does their team use that to their advantage? But in terms of just being able to draw a shitload of attention from the defense, yeah, basically every all-time great player, and especially every all-time great scorer, can do exactly that. From Juggy Boy, I like that name. Anthony Davis is arguably the greatest defensive player of this generation. It's a shame that he doesn't have a Defensive Player of the Year. I'm actually going to be doing a Who's the Best Defensive Player in the NBA video, and I was thinking about it recently that AD might actually be my answer to that question. Because, like, first of all, it's a center, okay? Just to make that clear, the best defensive player in the NBA is a center. I don't want to hear any other argument. It's a fucking center. And it's almost always a center just about every season of the NBA. With that said, there's really two extremes of that. You can go like the Rudy Gobert rim protector type, who's a more slow-footed guy, but still ultimately a devastating level defender in the area of the floor you want that devastating defense to be. Or you get like a Bam Adebayo, who is very, very versatile, can fucking defend Steph Curry at the center position, but sometimes he steps out of the paint, and you don't really want that too much. You still want your center to be in the paint ultimately, so sometimes that ability can get a little bit overrated by people, where it's like, yeah, switchability is nice and it matters, especially in certain contexts, but holistically, you want your five around the rim. AD, I feel like, is the perfect middle ground between those, where he's far more switchable than Gobert. Certainly not as switchable as Bam, but on the spectrum between those two, he's probably right down the middle. And then he's a great rim protector, just as good as Rudy Gobert, and certainly better than Bam. So yeah, I do think that AD is one of the greatest defensive players of this generation and of all time. But the matter is, DPOY doesn't necessarily go to generational defensive players. Tim Duncan never won it. Kevin Garnett only won it a single time. Andre Karolinko never won it, despite being runner-up multiple times. Like, that is just kind of the way it goes, because DPOY is a year-by-year award. We don't really look at like a historical legacy, like, oh, AD may have been one of the best defenders of his generation year after year after year, but in any of those individual years, Did he actually deserve to win the award? I don't necessarily know that that's the case. It's a shame, but it's also understandable. Like, I feel like a lot of people with the DPOY, with the MVP, will just go, oh, this guy should have won this. And it's like, okay, give me the year, give me the player that they should have won it over. And more often than not, they don't actually have an answer to that. So yeah, I'm going to say AD. I agree that he's one of the best of his generation, and it is a shame. Do I think he was like robbed of the award or anything like that? No, I just don't really think that at all. From Getting Ice, Lauri Markkanen can be a #1 on a championship team. He's a 7-footer that shoots 50, 40, 90. He's a good defender and rebounder. If Utah ever put a team around him, or in a couple of years he goes somewhere else, it wouldn't surprise me if Lauri led a team to a couple playoff series. Led a team that won a couple of playoff series, rather. First of all, on the good defender front, I mean, he's a fine rebounder, but I don't think I would go as far as to say he's a good defender. Now, the fact that you can play him at the 3 often, whilst he's still a 7-footer, I do think that has its advantages, and you could potentially put that schematically to where he ends up being a positive defender. I don't know that he's that good, though. Like, I wouldn't label him as a good defender without any hesitation like you do. Also, yes, he's a 7-footer who shoots 50, 40, 90. However, his offensive game has the limitation of being a non-ball handler or passer or really much of a creator at all. He is primarily a play finisher. Most of his buckets are assisted, whether they be catch and shoot threes or catch, pump fake, drive inside for a layup, or sometimes he gets like a face-up mid-range game here or there, but most of the time he's just playing within the flow of the offense. And those are dudes who are very good and very important and matter a lot, but play finishers are rarely the best and most important player on a championship team. Like, if you look at the last couple of titles especially, it's almost always the main dude is someone who's creating most of their offense and a lot of their team's offense. Lauri Markkanen's not really doing that. He needs someone to set him up, and he's not really going to set his teammates up. He's not necessarily like some bad playmaker, but it's also not one of his specialties. So I'm not going to say he can be a #1. I do think, though, such a good second option. I honestly don't know. I mean, I guess now it makes sense given the Hartenstein signing, but it didn't make much sense to me that OKC didn't trade for him, because he would have fit in seamlessly and been super easy to acquire. But wherever he may go, it's probably not going to be in Utah, but I do think he can be a strong contributor, if not the second best player on a title team, theoretically. I would even lean towards, yes, I think he can be that level of good. From Patrick05 Morgan, the criticism Steph Curry gets for using screens is one of the dumbest criticisms ever, considering that he's so often doubled or face guarded that he doesn't get as many chances to isolate as many other perimeter superstars. Pretty much the moment that Steph crosses half court, there's likely going to be 2 defenders unless he's on a really good team. In the last couple of years, his team has not been so good, so that meant that Steph doesn't get a lot of isolation opportunities, period. And I mean, what does it fucking matter? This is a thing that I always arrive to with these types of conversations, bag talk or who's better in isolation. Who really fucking cares? We're trying to win NBA basketball games. Score in whatever way scores the ball. Neither is more invalid than the other. Maybe you don't like one more than the other, but you can't use it to take away the validity of their offense. The NBA is not a 1v1 competition, it's 5v5, and whatever you gotta do to put points on the board, whether it's screens, and even if it's fucking foul baiting, I say that's up to you, and you have every right to do it, and I can't disparage it. Maybe in the foul baiting case there is some stuff, but like, Steph Curry didn't not win championships because he used screens too much. Who cares? Truly, I agree. Very dumb criticism. From Justin Carrington, that wall shit doesn't work. Giannis's teammates have just failed him. Bledsoe against the Raptors is the most blatant example. Look at how terribly he shot the ball. I believe in that Raptor series, Chris Middleton also shot horribly from 3, and like pretty much nobody else could hit a damn shot. And a lot of that was the scheme being like, look, we're not letting Giannis get in the rim. Someone else is going to have to hit a jump shot. I think more of it is the fact that Giannis improved a lot with his decision-making in terms of dealing with pressure from the defense, because it wasn't only that when he was making the reads to those guys, they were missing their shots. It's also like, he would throw bad passes and get dumb turnovers, or he wouldn't make the read in time. The pass would come a little bit too late, so by the time the defense rotated over, that shot was no longer all that open. That type of stuff happened pretty fucking often for him. I don't think I would go as far as to say that it's entirely a matter of that help, though, because it was an adjustment that Giannis had to get used to. Something similar happened with Joel Embiid this previous year, where, I mean, that was a better spaced offense than he had dealt with before, but also his decision-making just improved dramatically in terms of how he deals with pressure and a double team around the rim. So, yes, it was mostly that his teammates failed him, but another reason that it doesn't work is because Giannis is a better player than he was against the Toronto Raptors in 2019. This is another one in response to another take from the last video about MJ being essentially the template for what a GOAT is, but from Bishop the King. The reason MJ is still the template is because he checks every box, whereas every other player in the GOAT convo either fails to check a box or has major career flaws in comparison. And if you objectively apply the same level of scrutiny to everyone's career, it just so happens that MJ has the best, most solid argument for the NBA's GOAT. And I'm saying that as a Shaq and Bron fan. Well, if you're taking this from a perspective of checking multiple boxes, I think that is largely true. There's really no... When we're looking among the top players who have a shitload of championships, very few of them have 6 or more. Essentially, it's fucking Kareem and then Bill Russell, obviously. Everybody else has, like, Kobe has 5, Duncan has 5, LeBron has 4, Curry has 4, Magic has 5. You get what I'm getting at here. When you look at the checks off multiple championships, then you go on to checks off multiple MVPs and accolades, period. He checks all of those boxes. He literally has DPOY despite being a guard. Then you go to the numbers. He has 10 scoring titles and some of the most points scored ever. I think the most points scored ever over that stretch of years. And he's in the 30,000 point club despite the fact that he only really played 13 real seasons. That's a lot. And especially in a short amount of time, where you look at someone like Shaq and LeBron, they got all-time numbers. Both of them have 4 rings. LeBron has a bunch of MVPs and accolades. Shaq's accolades are a little bit thinner. So, yeah. Also, just looking at their game, Shaq had some more limitations, just given his free throw inability and lack of shooting and shot creation. So, I agreed with the sentiment that MJ had the best resume because it is the most versatile, but it is worth considering that versatility and checking multiple boxes isn't necessarily as important as checking the same box multiple times or checking different boxes in different ways than you are expecting. It's not quite as linear or black and white as just this guy checks the boxes, this one doesn't. But I absolutely get what you're saying, and you're mostly in the right there. All right, this is going to be the last one of the day from Halcher. Efficiency is not efficiency. All right, that's bold. You need to factor in what players you are playing, referring to what you said about Gobert guarding Aaron Gordon in the playoffs and giving him open corner threes. An open corner three might sound like the more efficient shot than a floater, but if Aaron Gordon is your corner shooter and Jokic is your floater guy, the more efficient shot is easily the floater. You can't just look into shot location. The guy who takes the shot is also important, if not more important. These are nuances that make a difference in the playoffs because most teams don't read such things in the scouting report. Example 2, Cameron Johnson is a really good three-point shooter and everyone knew it. However, back when he was still playing for the Suns, it was shown that he was not shooting from the corners, but from the top of the key. Those shots from the left side were at a ridiculous percentage, I think 48% if I remember correctly, but from the right side, he shot only 38%. Good teams knew that and forced him away from his sweet spots. Well, first of all, I don't really know how much you're actually able to play a shooter off of the three-point line in terms of like keeping them off of their spot. That's more of a paint post-up type of thing. You can definitely do like a top locking type thing to keep someone out of their spot, but for the most part, you're still going to get to your spots. It's more about they're defending it a little bit harder when you know they are in their hot spots. However, that is a level of applying analytics to the game that I think most players and scouting reports don't actually do to some super strong degree. Also, I don't know if your example with Aaron Gordon and Jokic is super good, because I think a floater is more efficient than an open corner three more often than not. Maybe a contested floater is a little bit different, but a floater is a per possession shot. I don't know what the league average floater percentage is, but I would wager per possession it generates a similar amount of points to an open corner three, because a jump shot's just less likely to go in than a floater. But all of that said, is this really that bold? Is this really that high of a take, to be honest? I mean, are most teams not aware of this? Because I do feel like you're underselling that reality. I don't know. This is a lot of words, and I'm trying to put together an actual argument here. Ultimately, what I'm getting at, you are right that the players taking the shot matters, but I don't think anyone disagreed with that. And like, it's not, an open corner three isn't an efficient shot if the person who's open isn't hitting it. And something like a contested pull-up jump shot, especially, is not a good look unless you have like Kawhi Leonard taking that shit. It's entirely dependent on the player what an actual efficient shot ends up being. So I think I agree with you, but that was a lot of words. I don't know. Let's just agree to maybe kind of agree or disagree. Whatever. Shout out to Nick for editing this video. That is it. Goodbye.